And I didn't even know it was Valentine's Day, and someone had broken into my car and left a rose on the driver's seat.
Goodness gracious.
Oh,
what about
really?
I was a bit horrified.
No, I think that's absolutely amazing.
And that freaked me out, actually. I was 18 and didn't even know what was going on. And then about a week later, this guy, I think he was doing metal work or some studies there, cornered me and asked if I liked the rose and, you'd like to go out and that was a very short, not romance. And I sometimes wonder if he's still breaking into cars for different reasons.
Break and enter, exactly. Well, that was a courageous move, but perhaps a little on that stalker side of things. Which,
I'd say so, wouldn't you, Sarah?
I don't encourage.
No. It is very romantic. On a final note, though, it is wonderfully romantic to keep that... anonymity alive the way. I mean, have the bravery, I guess, to actually send someone an anonymous bunch of flowers, or is that not acceptable in this day and age?
I think it's whatever goes and whatever makes people, whatever floats your boat, because I just believe we have very few occasions to celebrate love, to celebrate someone else, to celebrate the fact that you're actually... you actually really like someone, you love them, and you want to show them how much. We don't have a lot of those opportunities. We have turned into a slightly grinchy kind of a society. So, I think people want to go with it. Yeah.
Okay, Ben, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say it's not a Valentine's Day story, but once a woman who was stalking me paid my library fines when I was in university.
That is cerebral. I like that approach.
Yeah, and I thought that was great.
That's meaningful.
She never made contact, never, just purely selfless love.
How substantial was the library fine?
I think it was about $40, which was quite a lot when I was 21.
That's a good meal. Yeah, that's in lieu of a good meal.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Sarah Chatwin, a psychologist, explaining to us why we love or don't like Valentine's Day. But on a sort of another note, Ben, it can actually be a very lonely time, can't it? Can you recall those days maybe when you were younger?
Well, that's a bit pointed, Wallace.
Not so. I got a wonderful Valentine's Day present this morning. But in terms of, can you recall those days of being single in your bed, sit there, Ben? February 14th
with your mouldy bread.
February 14 rolls up, and you go to your letterbox. Nothing there yet. So you go back again at 10:30. Nothing there quite yet.
That's just Groundhog Day for me, Wallace. That's
Okay. Huey Lewis in the News, Stuck With You. And Ella...
you could take that either way, couldn't you?
Yes. Ella Fitzgerald, Blue Moon, favourite oldie, says Patrick there. And briefly, on a final note, a woman on an American Airlines flight has posted a video online showing the man sitting beside her punching the back of her reclined chair. She reclined, he hated it. It's got Twitter in a storm, this. Are you a recliner or not?
I am.
You are a
Yes,
recliner.
you pay for your seat and they just need to accept it.
Ben?
Absolutely not. I'm a very considerate flyer.
Good on you. Sally Winley, Ben Thomas, thank you very much for joining us on Valentine's Day today. I'm Wallace Chapman. See you Monday. Till then, bye.
Koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E Haere nei, in her own words, a woman accused of murdering her partner explains why she stabbed him to protect her son. Will the government extend border controls aimed at stopping the spread of coronavirus? Current special measures are due to expire Sunday, so what next? Calls for the government to immediately introduce strict monitoring of under 5-year-olds in the wake of the brutal beating of a 4-year-old Flaxmere boy. See you in court. A disability advocate is determined to keep Laura Ferguson rehabilitation services open, even if it means a legal battle. And Auckland's almost 40 days and 40 nights without rain. We visit a community surrounded by water with barely a drop to drink. RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. A woman on trial for murdering her abusive partner has told a jury she was protecting her son. Karen Ann Riddell is on trial at the High Court in Auckland, accused of murdering Joseph Ngāpera in their Manurewa home in 2018. Today, the 58-year-old told the jury the couple were arguing after a night out when her youngest son intervened. She said she instinctively picked up a nearby knife to protect them both.
So the table was set. My left hand, I reached over on the table and I grabbed the knife and I put it in my right hand, pushed out of the way with my left arm and struck Joe twice.
Karen Riddell giving evidence today. A woman who heard the sounds of a shootout with police says it's hard to believe what unfolded on the streets of Tauranga last night. The police chase started in the suburb of Bethlehem and ended about 6 minutes later near the city's CBD. A driver had refused to stop and fired numerous volleys at police before being shot and killed. This woman was at home and was startled by a noise.
Well, it sounded like a brrrt noise, and then we heard the sirens, and we knew that it was two cars because you could definitely hear a car going really fast and then a gap and then the siren car going, police car going, and they just roared past.
The man shot and killed by police last night was being sought in relation to a double homicide in Tauranga on Tuesday. Today, armed officers arrested a 25-year-old Bay of Plenty man in the Christchurch suburb of New Brighton in relation to the killings. The police say they believe he knows the man who died last night. Jacinda Ardern has paid tribute to former Prime Minister Mike Moore at his funeral in Auckland today. Mr Moore, who also led the World Trade Organisation, died earlier this month, aged 71. Ms Ardern told hundreds of mourners at the funeral held at his former school, Dilworth, this afternoon that she was often inspired by Mr Moore and visited him days before his death.
So now we say farewell to this man of the people. And we do so knowing that Mike rightly takes his place in the rare circle of New Zealand's conviction politicians. And as someone who embraced Norman Kirk's famous dictum that people don't want much, just someone to love, somewhere to live, somewhere to work and something to hope for.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. Attendance rates are falling at New Zealand's primary and secondary schools. Ministry of Education figures from the second school term of 2019 shows 58% of students regularly went to school, down from 64% in 2018. Rates worsened towards the end of the term and on Mondays and Fridays. Attendance has fallen steadily since 2015, with the largest declines among primary school and Māori and Pacific students. Filmmaker Renee Maihi says Sir Robert Jones's decision to abandon his defamation case against her has put an end to a stressful period of her life. The millionaire property investor was suing Maihi for calling him a racist and saying he is an author of hate speech. Ms Maihi says she has agreed to close the petition she initiated calling for Sir Robert's knighthood to be revoked, which was signed by 90,000 people. A group of Matoda residents says Rio Tinto is being negligent by leaving a potentially dangerous chemical in their town. 10,000 tonnes of hazardous waste from Tiwai Point's aluminium smelter is stored at the former Matoda paper mill in Southland. The Sort Out the Dross Action Group is hosting a public meeting tonight to voice community concerns. Spokesperson Cherie Chapman says the waste needs to go back to the smelter.
We believe Rio Tinto owns it, that Rio Tinto is responsible for it, and Rio Tinto needs to lift its game. And if we need to get the government to take them to court to do so, then so be it. But it doesn't speed up the process. So we need the smelter to come to the party.
Cherie Chapman of Sort Out the Dross. It's 4 minutes past 5. The Crusaders are playing down their winning streak over the Blues ahead of tonight's Super Rugby derby in Auckland. The Blues haven't beaten the defending champs since 2014. The two sides have won one game each so far this season, with the Blues beating the Waratahs last weekend, while the Crusaders lost to the Chiefs. Despite the Crusaders' historic dominance, coach Scott Robertson says that's not a true reflection of the rivalry.
If you look at the last few years, they've led us. We've come from behind to get them. They push us right late in games. So these are tough games. They're all earned. It's not give me at all.
The match kicks off at 7:05. 12 hours after being named Sportswoman of the Year, double Olympic canoe champion Lisa Carrington has blitzed the field to win the national K1 200 event at Lake Karapiro. Carrington finished a boat length ahead of the field to win the title for a 7th time. She was named New Zealand Sportswoman of the Year for a 4th time in Auckland last night. Rower Hamish Bond has made a successful return to cycling, winning the national time trial title in Cambridge this afternoon. Bond, a 2-time Olympic rowing champion, initially switched to cycling after the Rio Olympics and won a Commonwealth Games bronze medal on the road before returning to rowing last year. He intends competing at the Tokyo Olympics in the 8th later this year. That's the news.
Shots fired at police.
The offending driver leaned out of the vehicle and fired off a volley of shots at the police vehicle.
A call for action.
We're talking about the distribution of meth, a drug which is destroying the fabric of our society, and we've got to find a way to cut the head off the meth monster.
And more questions than answers.
New Zealand First need to front up and actually answer all of the questions.
All the developments. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow from Gisborne to Wairarapa. Becoming cloudy this evening, patchy drizzle developing tonight. Cloud and drizzle gradually clearing to fine weather tomorrow. For the remainder of the North Island, mainly fine with variable high cloud. Nelson, Buller and Westland mainly fine, becoming cloudy tomorrow. Fiordland, fine at first, becoming cloudy tonight and areas of drizzle developing, then turning to rain tomorrow evening. Marlborough, Canterbury, North Otago, Dunedin and Clutha, mostly cloudy with areas of drizzle and low cloud clearing tomorrow morning, but high cloud thickening up from tomorrow afternoon. For the remainder of Otago, also Southland, fine or becoming fine tonight, cloud increasing tomorrow, scattered rain developing in the evening. And Chatham Islands, cloudy today, becoming fine tomorrow. RNZ National, it's coming up to 5:07.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A woman on trial for murdering her abusive partner has told a jury she was protecting her son when she stabbed him. Karen Ann Riddell is on trial in the High Court at Auckland, accused of murdering Joseph Ngāpera in their Manurewa home in 2018. Today, the 58-year-old told the jury about falling in love with Mr Ngāpera and what happened the night she killed him. Our court reporter Annika Smith filed this report, and just a warning, her report contains some audio that listeners may find distressing.
Karen Riddell got into the witness box today and told the jury she first met Joseph Ngāpera in 2015. They fell in love, but as she grew to know him, his violent tendencies emerged. Ms Riddell said he first hurt her at home.
He grabbed me by the throat and he was strangling me. He had me up against the cupboard wall with both of his hands. I tried to say, "Stop, Joe, this is not you, this is not who you are." And he had me so tight with both hands. And then with my right hand, I touched him on the face and he let go. And then he grabbed me again by the throat. I thought I was going to die.
Ms Riddell said Mr Ngāpera continued to threaten and intimidate her throughout their relationship.
He told me that over in Australia that he had murdered someone and he had done 18 years in Long Bay prison, and that there was another time where he had hurt somebody in Queen Street, a homeless man, and that the homeless man had died.
She told the jury the couple had been out socialising at a Manurewa bar the night she killed him. They argued after her cousin dropped them home around 3 in the morning. Ms Riddell said Mr Ngāpera was angry her eldest son was staying at her house. They argued and things escalated.
Joseph stood up from his chair and he came towards me. He didn't like what I had said. I know I was going to get a crack from him anyway.
Ms Riddell said she knew Joseph would hit her.
I told him, "Stop, Joe, stop." And then after this, I yelled out. I never do anything like this, but I had to yell out for one of my children because I needed help.
She said she called out for her eldest son, but it was her 14-year-old who came running instead, pushing Mr Ngāpera in the chest.
A lot is going through my mind. Like, I can only think that Joseph's going to hurt him. Joseph's going to smack him.
She said what happened next was instinct.
So the table was set. My left hand, I reached over on the table and I grabbed the knife and I put it in my right hand, pushed out of the way with my left arm, and struck Joe twice.
Ms Riddell told the jury she used the knife with the sole intention of stopping Mr Ngāpera from hurting her or her son. It's the Crown's case she intended to kill him, while her defence has argued she was acting in self-defence. The jury has heard the couple were the subject of more than a dozen police call-outs and a protection order over the years. Yesterday, Ms Riddell described growing up with domestic violence and alcoholism in the family home. She said this carried on into her adult life, but she felt things were different with Mr Ngāpera.
He just kind of lifted me up. We had a few things in common, and he kept me uplifted and had a sense of humour. He was a good entertainer, played the guitar, wrote his own songs. And when he wasn't being a terrible person, he was a really good man.
Her lawyer, Paul Putty, asked the 58-year-old why she didn't leave him over the violence.
I stayed with him because I could see that he needed some help. He just needed some healing, and that I could support him and probably find him resources and places for him to get help.
Under cross-examination by Crown Prosecutor Jelena Jelavic, Ms Riddell confirmed she wasn't trapped in the relationship. She said she had her own money in place and would have had support from her family had she tried to leave Mr Ngāpera. The trial before Justice Palmer and a jury continues. Ātuite ko Timatua ko Annika Smith-Aho.
A man has been arrested in relation to a suspected double murder near Tauranga on Tuesday. The 25-year-old was arrested by armed police in the Christchurch suburb of New Brighton. Police say he's known to a man who fired at least 20 shots while fleeing from police in Tauranga last night. The man, who was alone in the car, refused to stop for police and fired numerous volleys at them before being shot and killed by police. The incident has shocked local people. Our reporter Andrew McRae starts with a police chase that started in Blenheim and ended 6 minutes later near the city's CBD.
The police chase started in the suburb of Bethlehem and ended about 6 minutes later near the city's CBD. Police say the driver and sole occupant of the car that refused to stop fired a number of shots at them before eventually stopping. When the man got out, he fired at police again and was then fatally wounded by officers. The drama unfolded on a normally quiet Carmichael Road at about 7:45. Reg Collins was just about to go for a walk.
And I was going to walk along here, and just at that moment a couple of cars, police cars, screamed to a halt, making a lot of noise, and before I could even get out of the building on my walk, I heard 4 shots, one after another, and I thought, there's something going on here. But by the time I actually got out and walked along here, there was nothing to see. They'd taken off.
He's in no doubt it was shots he heard.
Oh, yes, it was semi-automatic. It was quite clear.
Further down the street, this woman was home and was startled by a sound.
Well, it sounded like a brrrt noise, and then we heard the sirens, and we knew that it was 2 cars because you could definitely hear a car going really fast, and then a gap, and then the siren car going, police car going, and they just roared past. And one of my girls said to me, that sounded like gunshots. And I said, no, I don't think so. Don't be silly. We wouldn't have gunshots around here. But obviously it was.
She says at the time she wasn't frightened.
We didn't associate the gunshots with whatever else has been going on, and it was someone that would eventually end up being killed. But, we were glad we were inside. And one of my girls had just got home. She works, and she just walked home at 7:30, so I was very pleased that she was in the house.
This man, who didn't want to be named, heard 2 or 3 bangs. So you heard shots. What time was that about?
About 7:30.
Obviously there were shots. You didn't think it was something else?
No, I thought it was shots.
And what did you think had happened?
Oh, I had no idea. But, with the activity in McLaren's Falls the day before, it made you wonder.
Police District Commander Andy McGregor says the public don't need to be afraid.
And I want to reassure the community out there that they are safe. They got to remind themselves that actually this was just one motivated offender, one offender who did not want to be captured or caught by police.
He says extra staff have come in from outside the district to assist.
Those reassurance patrols will be carrying out patrols over a 24-hour period for the next week.
Out on the streets, locals were concerned about last night's shooting spree and the homicide of 2 men earlier in the week and other violent incidents in the region recently, but they remain stoic.
Well, we all have our ideas on what should be done, but we're probably not too willing to express them too much.
I think the police do a jolly good job.
We need to be more aware of what we're doing, of locking doors, of locking windows. It's the basic things we need to do to keep ourselves safe.
Yes, it hasn't troubled us. Most unfortunate.
Becoming frightened living in Tauranga?
No, not at all.
Well, it's the world we live in today, unfortunately. I don't like it, but you've got to learn to live with it.
What do you think it does for Tauranga's reputation?
Oh, I think it lowers it a bit. It's not something you really want happening in your backyard, is it?
Tauranga's Mayor Denby Powell says the recent violence in the region is gang-related, but Superintendent Andy McGregor won't commit himself.
At this stage, it's not for me to say. The investigation's still going on. We are looking into that.
He has high praise for the officers involved in last night's shooting.
They did what's expected of them in terms of actually keeping the public safe. You know, this person actually could have shot a member of the public. It looks like he's going back into the CBD, and obviously we had to stop that and do it in a safe place, and that's what we did.
Superintendent McGregor says about 50 officers are working across Tuesday's double homicide and last night's shooting. In Tauranga for Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
An incredible thinker, a Labour Party stalwart, international diplomat and a man who cared deeply about the lives of New Zealanders. They were just some of the tributes for former Prime Minister Mike Moore as he was laid to rest today. Former political colleagues, government ministers, family and a range of dignitaries attended the service held at Mr Moore's old school in Auckland. Our political editor Jane Patterson filed this report.
Hundreds packed into the school chapel at Dilworth Senior Campus in Epsom to the sound of the classic Jimmy Barnes song, summing up the man so many described as a working-class battler. Mr Moore, who served briefly as Prime Minister in 1990 and later led the World Trade Organisation, died earlier this month, aged 71. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, told mourners she was often inspired by Mr Moore, who knew politics could be tough and unforgiving.
He had his share of tough times, and sometimes they were tough too for the party that he served and loved. I saw a period that serves as a reminder that no matter what, the people we serve are our most important motivating factor, that we are all mere servants to that cause.
She visited him shortly before his death and as she left asked him if there was anything she could do.
He didn't hesitate. He asked that I look out for the people that had always looked out for him. The people who some 30 years ago had worked for him, alongside him, in tough times and good times, and who he felt such loyalty and commitment to. It was a simple mark of the selfless love that he had for people. So now we say farewell to this man of the people.
Close friend and Labour Party protege Clayton Cosgrove told the story of when Mr Moore visited the Governor of Easter Island.
Now it should be noted that the language of Easter Island is Rapa Nui, which is very similar to the language New Zealand Maori. At one point in the meeting, the Governor fell about laughing when Mike patted his large stomach and then his own ample waistline and pointing to both said, "Big pukus." What Mike didn't realise is although the languages are similar, they are not exactly the same. Puku, of course, is Maori for stomach, but in Rapa Nui it means penis.
He said those who described Mike Moore as bitter did not know the man.
One of his strongest personality traits, which was both a great strength, a great Christian strength actually, but also a political weakness, was his ability to forgive those who had wronged him. I remember on many an occasion working for him, when he was Labour leader, when someone had done him over. Those of us around him would be gnashing our teeth in condemnation, and yet Mike would say, "Hang on," and then proceed to defend the perpetrator and welcome them back into the circle with kind words, gestures and opportunities.
Former Labour Party MP and long-time friend Bill Jeffries summed up Mr Moore's life.
The physically disabled boy who laid the financial foundations for sport in New Zealand,
The boy who left school in his teens but wrote a dozen thoughtful books, one of which is published in Chinese, who mastered the intricate technical rules of international trade. His great intellect, as the Prime Minister noted.
Former Australian Labor Party leader Kim Beazley spoke fondly of his old friend and of the time when they were both ambassadors to the United States for their respective countries.
I was aware that despite the apparently improbable vessel, the unforced humility and self-deprecation, I had as an ally in Mike a man of genius, a man who would never present a problem without an answer, whose knowledge of the character of the distribution of power in the international system kept him permanently realistic, but also alert to every possibility.
And he spoke of what he described as Mike Moore's humble genius.
Massive intelligence, empathy, and above all, insatiable curiosity beats formal book learning every time. Instead, in his case, he wrote the books. He spoke only English, but joked his accent made him incomprehensible in that. And yet, we Aussies and Kiwis share that in common.
There were also tributes from the other side of the political aisle, including former National Party Prime Minister Jenny Shipley.
Mike saw in the Parliament a way to serve his country, and it is my privilege to acknowledge him and your gift and contribution as well.
Mike Moore's nephew Nick gave a more personal account, saying his uncle had a peculiar mix of intensity and humour.
So in one moment he would be fixing you with a deadly serious stare, and then suddenly he'd be laughing irreverently about something salty, as Clayton has suggested. And what a great laugh he had. He had so many stories to tell in that wonderful voice of his.
But he said he took most comfort in Mike Moore's presence as a trusted member of the family.
In some ways for me, Mike was like that fond bit of country in your memory that's always been there, a happy place of permanence. But sadly, unlike that beach or hill or rock that's still there, he's gone now.
For Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
It is exactly 5:22 and 10 seconds on my studio digital clock here. The other one, the old one, seems to have given up the ghost. Ah, well, it is Friday. Remember, you can get in touch about anything you've heard on the programme this evening. You can text us on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. See you in court. That's the message from a disability advocate fighting to stop the planned closure of Laura Ferguson Rehabilitation and Respite Services. Checkpoint revealed the charity will shut up shop in Auckland, Waikato and Whanganui by August, citing the Ministry of Health's refusal to provide more funding as a core reason for the closure. But the ministry maintains the trust hasn't asked for extra money. Laura Ferguson Rehab offers residential and outpatient care, including programs for people living with complex disabilities and those affected by strokes, brain and spinal injury. Disability advocate Jane Carrigan says the closures will be the nail in the coffin of respite care. She says people with disabilities and their families deserve better.
The children and the adults that we're talking about, Lisa, are very, very disabled. They're not got a hearing problem, they've not got a walking problem, they've not got a seeing problem. They have multiple disabilities, they have multiple health problems. You can't just chuck them into a home and have a care support worker sit and read their telephone while they're keeping an eye on a person. These people need both medical and disability care and support. And the closure of Laura Ferguson really is just the nail in the respite coffin in New Zealand.
So what are your worst fears here?
Well, they're not my worst fears. I know they will happen. I'll be accused of being alarmist and all of those sorts of things, but I'm not alarmist. I know I have worked with these very high needs people, and I know what it's like to go for a month of Sundays without sleep at night time because you're up all night trying to do something, trying to placate a person who quite often is suffering because of pain that they can't identify. So, anyone who is high and very high needs, Lisa, they need 24/7. If you're lucky, just mere supervision. But if you're not lucky, then you've got everything else thrown in, and that is most of these children and these adults.
Is this salvageable with the Laura Ferguson rehabilitation? Is it savable?
Well, till the day before it closes, as far as I'm concerned, it's completely salvageable. I know that Laura Ferguson Trust are telling parents that even if they were given the money, they would close. I mean, that just beggars belief. That in itself should be reviewed by the court, because why? If they were given the money, the ministry, I won't say they've offered them all the money, but they've hinted that they would be amenable to some sort of financial assistance. If they were offered the money, why would you close it? I can't help but notice that the board members are made up largely of property developers, construction experts, engineers, architects, finance, retail, lawyers. So what? You know, the day the last cripple crawls out of the place, they'll be moving in their bulldozers. Who knows? But I mean, it's utterly cynical as far as I'm concerned.
So, if you are left with no choice and the closure is to go ahead, it is your intention to take someone to court?
Well, we've already indicated to the parties. We've tried to meet with them. We've tried to talk to them. We've had no response. We're hoping that the letter sent to them today might focus their mind to, as I say, don't even talk to us, talk to each other and come up with some sort of outcome that actually benefits the people that Laura Ferguson was developed for, is purpose built for, and frankly is effectively the property of disabled people and people with disabilities in Auckland. That place has served thousands over the years, and I have an elderly gentleman, a 70-year-old, who lived in that place for 16 years, and him and his wife, they often speak about how if they hadn't had the benefit of Laura Ferguson, the safety and the security that place offered them until they were thrown out into the community because the government told them it would be better for them, they don't know what they would have done. This place has memories and it should have a future, not just memories.
I understand you've written to the Prime Minister. Have you had a response?
Well, the good Prime Minister hears from me daily just about at the moment, and today she's actually heard from me 3 times. No, I haven't had a response. Look, we're dealing with bureaucrats who, well, they've forgotten how the real world lives, quite frankly.
So you have written to the Prime Minister. What would you like to say to her directly now?
I would say to her directly that in the last 20 days she has saved Classic FM from turning to an AM free-for-all classical radio station. She has this morning backed the locals down in Gore who are complaining about Rio Tinto's using their backyard as a dumping spot. The Prime Minister has enormous influence. Her constituents are the people who use Laura Ferguson Trust. These are the same people who actually can't get out and can't protest. And the families who look after some of these more high-end children and adults, they can't get out and they can't protest. They are flat out existing, let alone complaining. So I want the Prime Minister I would ask her to put herself in these people's shoes. I would beg her to intervene in this. It just cannot close.
So where's this going to end up? In court?
Well, we'll give it the weekend, see what happens early next week, and yes, if we don't get any traction out of the letters today, on top of our efforts for the last fortnight, then yes, it will end in court, and then who knows where it will end? Because quite frankly, there's something that completely stinks about this whole situation. The government's remaining so quiet about it, with the exception of their concession that they've never been asked for money. And the Laura Ferguson Trust, look, I think it stinks. And if it ends up in court, then it's going to open a Pandora's box as far as I'm concerned. And that is not necessarily a bad thing.
That's disability advocate Jane Carrigan, who is contemplating taking the Ministry of Health and or Laura Ferguson Trust to court for a potentially judicial review over the planned closure in August of all those services. Let us know if you are using those respite and rehabilitation services and how you feel about the situation. Text us on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It's a day of both celebration and disappointment for supporters of filmmaker Renee Maihi after Sir Robert Jones dropped his defamation case against her. The millionaire property investor was suing Ms Maihi after she started a petition calling a column he wrote racist and hate speech. The trial was set to go into its fifth day until Sir Robert's lawyer Fletcher Pilditch confirmed this morning the case had been discontinued. Mediana Johnson reports.
Renee Maihi's supporters sung her a waiata after the news broke the case had been dropped. Ms Maihi says Sir Robert's decision to abandon his defamation case against her has put an end to her stress.
This brings an end to a stressful period of my life, but that said, I hope the conversation about racism in this country will continue in the most dignified manner possible.
Ms Maihi says she's agreed to close the petition she wrote, calling for Sir Robert's knighthood to be revoked, which has been signed by over 90,000 people.
This has always been about highlighting the harm and impact that racist language has, both now and historically. It is important for us all to remember that language and articles of this nature, whether intentional or not, can and do cause hurt.
In a statement, Sir Robert says he withdrew his defamation case because the parties may never agree on what is acceptable humour. However, he accepted there was no malice from either side, so it was sensible to put an end to proceedings. The public gallery of the courtroom has been packed every day this week, with many showing up to support Ms Maihi. Susan Tamaki has come on her lunch break every day to tautoko her.
Renee's been incredible. She's been standing up for Māori and Manawahine, and I realise that there isn't any legislation around racism and that they don't have a definition for it. And so for me, this was going to be groundbreaking that Renee was about to help write that piece of legislation. And so I'm a little bit disappointed that Bob has pulled out because she can't continue with that.
Laura O'Connell-Rapira was also disappointed the case wasn't heard fully.
I think it's somewhat sad that we're not going to be able to set a precedent for a legal definition of what racism is, because I think as long as we don't have that in New Zealand case law, we risk people continuing to take advantage of that loophole by writing words that cause great harm to huge numbers of people.
However, she hoped that people would feel empowered by what Renee had done.
I certainly hope that this experience, this campaign, this case helps people see how much power we have as ordinary people to take on really entrenched power and win. I think it's really important that we keep standing up for our people, for each other, for aroha, for an inclusive Aotearoa.
But for Ratu Tibble from Ngāti Porou, who has also been at the trial every day, Sir Robert withdrawing his case doesn't go far enough.
The only thing he hasn't committed to yet is the generous throwing out of his status, the knighthood. I think he should publish it to the world and say, I have renounced my knighthood.
Supporters of Renee Maihi are gathering at Pipitia Marae this evening for a poroporo ake to draw a line under her legal ordeal. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Mediana Johnson tēnei.
On Checkpoint on RNZ National, calls for AFCO to front up over the death of a worker at its Wairoa plant. Should all under 5-year-olds be registered and randomly checked on in a bid to stop New Zealanders beating our children? And one man gets 70,000 love letters this Valentine's Day. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program today. Get in touch by text 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email. checkpoint@rnz.co.nz is the address. And Susanna is standing by with the headlines.
A woman has told a jury she was protecting her son when she stabbed her abusive partner in their Manurewa home in 2018. Karen Ann Riddell is on trial at the High Court in Auckland, accused of murdering Joseph Ngāpera. Today, she said the couple were arguing when her youngest son intervened, and she instinctively picked up a nearby knife to protect them both. Armed officers have arrested a 25-year-old Bay of Plenty man in Christchurch today in relation to the killings of 2 men in Tauranga on Tuesday. The police say they believe he knows the man who was killed in a shootout with the police in Tauranga last night. He was also being sought in relation to the double homicide and fired numerous shots at the police from his car before being shot dead himself. Attendance rates are dropping at both primary and secondary schools. Education Ministry figures from the second term last year show just 59% of children went to school regularly, down from 64% in 2018. Attendance has fallen steadily since 2015, with the largest declines among primary and Māori and Pacific students. Matoda residents are angered by Rio Tinto reneging on a verbal deal to remove 10,000 tonnes of a potentially dangerous chemical from their town. 10,000 tonnes of hazardous waste from Tiwai Point's aluminium smelter is stored at the former Matoda paper mill. A spokesperson for the Sort Out the Dross Action Group says the mining company is treating them with contempt. Labour Party stalwart, diplomat and trade leader Mike Moore has been farewelled at a funeral at Dilworth School in Auckland this afternoon. Jacinda Ardern described Mr Moore, who served as Prime Minister briefly in 1990, as a man of the people. Mr Moore, who led the World Trade Organisation during a time of momentous changes in the global economy, died earlier this month aged 71. The Wairoa District Mayor is calling on the AFCO Meat Company to tell the community when it plans to fully reopen, following the death of a worker last week. Alfred Edwards, who was 61, was reportedly crushed by falling pallets. Mayor Craig Little says it's a tragedy for the whole town and the uncertainty is adding to the stress. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's time for the business news now with Nona Peltier, who's joined me in the studio. And hi, Nona. NZX, so it's reported a strong full-year result. What numbers do you have for us?
Yeah, so the NZX is the operator of the stock market, and they had a pretty good year, which reflects what we saw in the market. The NZX Top 50 Index rose about 30% last year, and so that's reflecting in their result. The operator's result was up about 0.25%, actually a little bit more. Not 0.25%, up by a quarter. That's 25%. Excuse me. Let's just get that right. To 14.6 million. Now, if they take out the non-operation, so they've discontinued some of their businesses, it was still up more than 7%. So that's still quite a good result for NZX. And even though they only had 2 company listings in the past year, they still are very, very positive because those 2 particulars, which were Canna South, which is a cannabis research company, and the other one, which was Port of Napier or Napier Port, were both well received and supported by the market. They're saying that there is a very strong movement, some momentum behind the capital markets. The value of the capital markets in New Zealand nearly doubled in the past year to $18.7 billion. And a lot of that was in growth in exchange-traded funds. And those are the kinds of funds people can trade themselves. It's a passive type of fund. It doesn't require an active manager. And the chief executive expects those to continue to build momentum because there is a move towards that as well. Kiwi Savers really driving the growth in those particular funds. So good result for NZX, and they're expecting a good year ahead.
On the flip side, perhaps, manufacturing industry has contracted for 2 months in a row. Now, what does that tell us about how things are going?
Yeah, it doesn't tell us a lot of good things about the manufacturing sector. And this was before the coronavirus, the COVID-19, first time I've ever said that out loud. Yep. The COVID-19 virus was something that did appear in a couple of the comments that they gathered in the January numbers, but it didn't really feature. So how much more effect that's going to have, it's hard to say. However, our numbers, even though they were in contraction, mirrors what's happening in the global world. So in terms of PMI, this is a pretty common kind of economic indicator that many countries gather that same type of information. And if you put the chart up against the other, the global versus New Zealand, there's hardly any difference at all. So we are really tracking what's happening around the world. It's going to be hard to say what happens next because there's a lot of wild cards out there. We don't really know how long this virus will persist. Certainly manufacturers are going to be taking a bit of a pause there to see how it all shakes out.
And we'll have more on the coronavirus later in the program, but bring us up to date with today's numbers, Nona.
Yeah, so there was a bit of, with the change in the number of, deaths and cases of the virus, the markets, it sort of sent a bit of a chill through the markets as well. And so our top 50 index, it closed down more than 0.33%. It's 46 points down to 11,835. That's still quite a strong market, isn't it? And the New Zealand dollar is buying 64.3 US cents. 95.7 Australian, 49.3 British pence, which is pretty much where we were this morning.
Thanks, Nona. That's Nona Peltier with some of your business numbers. And if that is not enough for you, there are some more business offerings. You can check out this week's podcast, 2 cents worth. Now, since the 80s, think big has been a bit of a dirty word. So the government's plans to spend $12 billion on infrastructure has some people quaking in their boots. So 2 cents worth revisits think big to see if it's been as bad as it was made out to be. So you can get that through your normal channels for podcasts, 2 cents worth, really worth a listen. The extreme dry spell affecting many parts of the country continues to bite with water restrictions, fire bans and farms being brown and barren dust poles. Soil moisture deficits are worsening across most of the North Island and the upper half of the South Island around Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury. And while there may be some rain on the horizon next week, it's not soon enough for those reliant on water. Andrew McRae reports.
NIWA says soil moisture levels are well down across much of the North Island. Meteorologist Ben Null defines Waikato, Auckland and Northland as being in severe meteorological drought, but it doesn't stop there.
A couple other areas we're watching very closely. One is in northern Canterbury, so especially north of Christchurch, where drought has emerged, and another area of meteorological drought has now emerged in the northern part of Gisborne.
He says soil moisture is more than 50 millimetres below normal in the upper part of the North Island. And he says it hasn't been this bad since the last big dry spell, a drought in 2013.
There are areas that are seeing soil moisture deficits, like Northland, that are more severe than was the case in 2013. So certainly over the last 10 to 15 years, this is for some regions about the driest that it's been.
Dick Searling farms on the Coromandel near Whirianga. He hasn't seen his dairy farm looking as dry for at least 40 years.
Very brown and yellow and bare.
He's having to buy in feed and water for his stock.
Yeah, you got no choice. As a farmer, you learn to live with the weather, and if you don't learn to live with the weather, well, then you probably shouldn't be farming. So, yeah, you got no choice. You go with the flow, but, you make maybe relatively small on-farm decisions early on.
Te Awamutu in Waikato is under heavy water restrictions with no outside use of water allowed. Waipa Mayor Jim Milcrest says a new water pipe will alleviate the situation, but that won't be for 18 months.
The community's still using about 190 litres of water per person per day. So in terms of our public supply, nobody's actually run out of water. But that's not the case with some private supplies, of course, where they're relying on tank water and bores that are also the water levels dropping.
Most of the country is now under either a prohibited or restricted fire ban. Tim Mitchell from Fire and Emergency says everyone needs to be careful and take precautions to prevent a fire starting.
Because things are so dry, it will only potentially take one spark. So there is a very high risk at the moment across a large area of the country for a wildfire to start and do damage.
Auckland is looking set to break a climate record this weekend, marking 40 consecutive days with less than 1 millimetre of rain. The Auckland Council's helping people living in rural areas which are on tank supply. Kate Crawford, Head of Emergency Management, says they're coordinating with water supply companies
to ensure that they're able to meet the demand and looking at alternative arrangements to ensure that we're able to supply those private operators with access to the water.
For most people on the land, extreme dry spells are not what you want or need, but not everyone's down in the dumps. Grape growers are loving it. Chris Howell is from Prospect Vineyard in Hawke's Bay.
So we like it dry because it makes controlling disease a lot easier because they are a very perishable crop. And the heat is really good for reducing acids and building flavour, particularly in the red wine varieties.
He says farmers and grape growers always want different weather conditions at this time of year.
I think farmers have had a pretty good run the last few years, so maybe it's our turn.
Some relief is likely next week with the chance of widespread rain coming from weakening ex-tropical cyclone Yesi. Ben Knoll from Niwa says Yesi's heading for the South Island and may bring heavy rain to areas that don't need it, but all's not lost.
That could open the door to some subtropical moisture that streams into the north or from the north toward New Zealand. But those weather systems, sometimes they track to the west of New Zealand, which could be good news for us if they become near the North Island.
Ben Knoll says the driest parts of the country need at least a month's worth of rain or more to replenish the lack of soil moisture. For Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
Meanwhile, Auckland Council is looking at using Fonterra's milk tankers to try and get water to thousands of households whose tanks are running dangerously low. Auckland is on track to reach 40 consecutive days without rain this weekend. And for properties which aren't connected to the main water supply, the situation is getting dire. Water tankers are working overtime to get top-ups to as many people as possible, but there are still weeks-long waits with no rain in sight. Our reporter Nita Blake Person and cameraman extraordinaire Nick Munro filed this report.
Marie Sheffer is running out of water. The tank at her Whangaparaoa home is almost out and she's in a growing queue of people waiting for a tanker to top her up.
You can see our plants, they're just dead because we can't afford to water them. You know, there's not that much water around. Here we've got our water babies, so to speak, because this is honestly how we are surviving. We are tipping these into our tank, sometimes daily, sometimes twice daily, just to try and keep our water levels up so that we don't run out and ruin our pump.
The blue skies blanketing much of the North Island have become a burden for her and her family. They can't wash, clean or cook at home because of the lack of water and are visiting family most days to use their supply.
It's quite a bit of stress having to sit there and ration water when, you know, you've never really had to sort of ration it quite that much before. Even in other summers where we've run out or come close to running out, the wait time certainly hasn't been as long, and just the whole stress of having to be so extra careful because there's nothing. There's not even, it doesn't even get humid, you know?
Auckland is set to break a record for the city's longest dry spell this weekend. If it doesn't rain before Sunday, it will mark 40 consecutive dry days. And for thousands of households not on the main water supply in the north, west and south of Auckland, that's taking its toll.
It's a dire situation. It hasn't rained for a long time, since before Christmas, and even then there wasn't much rain. So people on tank water, like myself, are literally running out of water.
Local Whangaparaoa councillor Wayne Walker says council facilities are available for people to fill up containers and shower at while they wait for deliveries.
Normally you can get a water tanker at relatively short notice, but in a situation where you've got big demand like this, there are only so many water tankers. I'll be getting a hose over from a neighbour and getting a top-up. That's great. And fortunately, there are a lot of people in that situation. The critical message to get across is be good to your neighbours.
Tanker driver Rob says he's been in the business for 13 years, but it's never been this busy.
Today I've got 16, averaging around 12 to 14. So busy day today. Further up north, they're just crying for it, you know. You can't get tankers, you know. It's pretty dire. You've got people with stock and things like that can't water their animals, and it's getting real bad.
But there is hope for households, with Auckland Council hatching a plan.
One of the things that the council is looking at is cutting a deal with the likes of Fonterra to make those sorts of tankers available to put water out there.
Auckland Council confirmed this afternoon that it will be supplying water in large-scale milk tankers in sites in Welsford and Helensville tomorrow to help keep up with demand. And in the meantime, Maria Scheffer is practising her rain dance.
Praying for rain. Come on, rain dance. But, yeah, it's tough.
For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
And if you were listening to that on the drive home, you can go back and watch the video of Nita in Nick's piece. It is 12 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on that. Are you in one of the areas that is basically running dry? Are you on tank water? How are you managing? And if you've got any clever water saving tips, we'd love to hear from you as well. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A sudden surge in the number of deaths and cases of the COVID-19 coronavirus has caused shock and concern. Hubei province recorded 242 deaths and nearly 15,000 cases yesterday. But the World Health Organization says China is using a broader definition to diagnose people, and that's responsible for the increase. It says there's no major shift in the pattern of the coronavirus and cases are not rapidly rising outside China. On the ground, though, the Chinese government is keen to get a message out of the strength of its response to the outbreak. The BBC's John Sudworth reports.
China's at war with this virus, flying in extra supplies and a reinforcement of 2,600 extra troops. But there's still deep confusion about the enemy they're fighting, how many it's infected and how many it's killing. Until now, only those with a positive lab test were counted as confirmed cases, but lab tests take time. Now, patients confirmed by much quicker CT scans are being included. It's slightly less reliable, but it means the number of cases has rocketed. What's far more worrying is the big leap in deaths. The sudden increase is made up of those patients who only had CT scans, not counted before. But are those extra deaths added up from across the past 3 weeks, or are they a new daily count, pointing to a hidden number of similar daily deaths? China hasn't told us. It's been focused on messages of loyalty. These patients are being sworn in to a communist committee. And it's been settling political scores, removing Jiang Chaoliang as boss of the province where the outbreak started. The media are showing hard-working hero stories too. It's driver Zhang Jiapeng's wedding anniversary. Come home soon, his sign says. His wife's a nurse, looking after virus patients, and contact with the outside world is forbidden. From Beijing, I ask if China can beat the virus. Of course we'll win, he says. Even in China's capital, the impact is felt. This shop is keeping a safe distance from its customers.
China is now portraying this as a patriotic fight involving the masses, the enforcement of strict quarantine measures, and the mandatory wearing of face masks. But of course, viruses don't listen to propaganda. They are best beaten with good data and an open and transparent public health policy.
There's no shortage of fighting spirit, but there's so much we still don't know about how this is going to end.
John Sudworth reporting. And back here, the government's considering whether to extend border restrictions aimed at curbing the spread of coronavirus. Currently, any foreigners who have travelled through mainland China are being refused entry into New Zealand. The temporary measure was brought in on February 2nd and is due to expire on Sunday. Earlier this afternoon, I spoke to the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, who has advised the government on whether or not the restrictions should be extended. I asked Dr. Bloomfield I asked him how the ministry was going, tracking down New Zealanders who had recently returned from China.
Well, the key thing here is that we're seeing an increasing number of people still self-registering, and we're up well over 3,000 folk now who have actually self-registered by calling in through that Healthline number. And we're just still getting on with getting the data back from customs of others who have come in, checking to see if they have already self-registered and if not, the Healthline are working through that list and contacting people.
So what's the outstanding number of people that you need to track down?
I don't know the exact numbers, but I think the key thing is to see the increasing number of people who are actually self-registering, because that's the biggest contributor to making sure we've got a record of where people are. And as I say, we're well over 3,000 now.
Do you not know that number because you can't tell from the information available to you?
Well, it depends on how many people are coming in each day. We know that probably around 6,000 or just over 6,000 people have come in since the 3rd of February. We've got over half of those have self-registered. And the really good thing there is that those who are self-registering and the ones that Healthline is following up, people are understanding the obligation around self-isolation and they're doing that.
Let's talk about the evacuees who are quarantined at Whangaparaoa. How many people are up there and what happens to them next week when the quarantine period ends?
Sure. So a total of 157 people up there, and 59 of those are non-Kiwis, and their planning is well and trained now to repatriate them to the countries where they usually live once the 14 days comes to an end. So our Foreign Affairs colleagues are very active in that process and working with both New Zealand authorities, of course, as well as the governments in those countries. So once that period finishes, the New Zealanders here, and I'm sure they'll be glad for it, will be able to return to their homes. And then we're making well down the train and making arrangements for repatriating those who are not Kiwis.
What about the New Zealanders who are on that cruise ship, the Diamond Princess? How many are due to return to New Zealand, and are we making any special provisions for them?
Well, I know that consular staff, New Zealand consular staff in Japan, are in regular contact with the New Zealanders there. The two who have been unwell and looked after in hospital, as well as those who are still on the ship. Obviously, that's still quite an evolving situation with an increasing number of people testing positive on the ship. As far as I know, it's still only the 2 New Zealanders who have been confirmed positive, and I know consular staff are in regular contact to ensure that once that quarantine period is over, they can return home.
What are your thoughts on whether there should be any special provisions on their return to New Zealand?
Well, if they have been in quarantine and they're at no risk of having the disease because they haven't been exposed, then they can just come home and go about their normal lives. But we'll be working very closely with the consular staff, and it's a small number of New Zealanders, so we'll be making sure that whatever the circumstances are, that they're followed up if required.
Do you have any concerns about the testing on board, the rate of testing?
Oh, look, my sense is the Japanese authorities are being very prudent about testing, and anyone who's showing any symptoms or may have been exposed to a possible case is being tested, and we're seeing an increasing number of people who are testing positive. I suspect there is an equally large, if not larger, number of people who have tested negative. So it seems to me they've got a very low bar for testing.
But there are reports in other media that only about 300 tests are able to be done at any one time, and some of the people who are due to be released from the ship may not have been tested at the time of their release. Is that safe practice?
Well, I'll just leave that. As I say, I think the Japanese authorities have treated this very, very carefully and very cautiously. I suspect they'll be testing anyone who they think is symptomatic, and that's the same here. We've got a lot of people in self-isolation. We've got some people who there's been a suspicion they may have been exposed, and testing has been done. Over 60 people here in New Zealand have been tested. Those tests have all been negative. So I think that the key thing here is if people are symptomatic, they are being tested and to rule out or rule in whether it's the COVID-19 virus that's causing them to be unwell.
So the current restrictions on travelling to New Zealand via mainland China, now that's due to expire on about Sunday, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. So those current restrictions expire on Sunday at midnight, and we've got advice that's gone through to ministers to support a decision around whether or not those current measures get extended.
What advice have you given them?
Oh, I can't preempt the decision by ministers, so they will...
Not asking you to preempt the decision, merely to say what your advice is.
We've given them very good advice based on the evidence and the epidemiology of this emerging situation. And just to reiterate, as I have in my media stand-ups, we're still in a situation, a rapidly evolving and high level of uncertainty. So, our measures to date have been appropriate and precautionary, and we've given good rounded advice to ministers, and I know they will announce their decision once they've considered that advice.
It sounds like your advice would be to err on the side of caution and to extend the ban, given what you've just said.
Let's just see what ministers decide. They've got the advice and they'll announce that.
And that was Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, and the Minister of Health has received that advice, and his office says an announcement about those border controls is expected in the coming days. Quick bit of feedback from you, getting in touch regarding the water. This is the fact. Auckland hasn't had proper rain for a number of days. This person says, try living on Waiheke Island. Next available water delivery date is the 28th of May. Goodness me. And someone else says, very dry at Muriwai, doing dishes English style in a basin and using the water on swan plants, buckets in the shower and grey water for the veggie garden, extra mulch, ornamental plants under the hedge, washing at the laundromat, down to 15,000 litres. Should get through though. Others are saying every household should take responsibility by installing its own reservoir for water. And someone else is saying their water saving tip is just to get rid of pastoral farming and open grazing. That's dehydrating the landscape, plant more trees, and to regulate the water cycle. That from Greg in Wanaka.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. The number of children regularly going to school has dropped. Ministry of Education data from the second school term of 2019 showed 58% of students regularly went to school, down from 64% in 2018. The Associate Education Minister Tracy Martin says some drop in attendance could be put down to legitimate illness, but patterns also showed a jump in absences on Mondays, Fridays and the last day of term. Ms Martin says every day away from school can affect results, and parents and schools need to take the issue seriously.
We're trying to get across to parents and to students every single day. A loss of a day adds up over time, and at the end of the day, it's going to mean you're not going to achieve at the level that you could have achieved at if you'd stayed in school.
Tracy Martin says the government is working with schools in South Auckland and Kawerau to build attendance plans and make services more effective for children. A woman on trial for murdering her abusive partner has told a jury she was defending her son. Karen Ann Riddell is on trial in the High Court at Auckland, accused of murdering Joseph Ngapira in Manurewa 2 years ago. Today she's told the jury the couple were arguing after a night out when her youngest son intervened. She said she instinctively picked up a knife on a nearby table, thinking only of the safety of herself and her son. It's the Crown's case that she intended to kill Mr Ngapira, while her lawyers say she was acting in self-defence after years of abuse. The Wairoa District Mayor Craig Little is calling on the AFCO Meat Company to be more open with the community about its plans in the wake of a death at the works last week. 61-year-old Alfred Edwards, known as Baldy, was killed last Wednesday. Mr Little says it was a tragedy for the family, his workmates and the whole town. He says the uncertainty over when the plant will fully reopen is adding to the stress.
I understand the reason they've closed the works. They've got to do a full investigation and obviously they don't want this accident ever to happen again. But, I do understand the plight the workers are in.
Craig Little says the AFCO Works, which employs about 550 people at the height of the season, is one of the region's biggest employers. Filmmaker Renee Maihi says Sir Robert Jones's decision to abandon his defamation case against her has put an end to a stressful period of her life. The millionaire property investor was suing Maihi for calling him a racist and saying he is an author of hate speech. Ms Maihi says the case was always about highlighting the harm that racist language has.
This brings an end to a stressful period of my life, but that said, I hope the conversation about racism in this country will continue in the most dignified manner possible.
Renee Maihi says she has agreed to shut down the petition she initiated calling for Sir Robert's knighthood to be revoked. The Abortion Legislation Committee has delivered its findings on the abortion legislation bill. Among the committee's recommendations are safeguards to address sex selection, late-term terminations and removing some of the barriers for an abortion. Committee Chair Ruth Dyson says she was very disturbed to hear the considerable delays women are faced with. A Southland community is calling for Rio Tinto to remove hazardous waste left in their town. 10,000 tonnes of Uvea premix left over from the company's Tiwai Point aluminium smelter is stored at the former Matoda paper mill. The town's Sort Out the Dross Action Group is holding a public meeting tonight. Its spokesperson, Cherie Chapman, says she's disappointed Rio Tinto has turned down an invitation to the meeting.
Either they don't care about it or they don't think it's their role, or they're just quite happy for that stuff to stay there. So this is not the first time this has happened. I think they're treating the people of Matada with contempt. They need to lift their game.
Cherie Chapman. MPs and representatives from the Gore District and Southland Regional Councils will be at the meeting. It's 6:04. Sportsman of the Year, MMA fighter Israel Adesanya says it's time people stopped trying to bring down those who succeed. The mixed martial arts exponent won the Sportsman of the Year title at last night's Holberg Awards after winning and defending the UFC World Middleweight title in 2019. The Nigerian-born New Zealander has called for the tall poppy syndrome to end.
I'm constantly getting hacked at and everyone trying to chop me down. And I've seen it before also as a kid because I didn't know better. I just thought it's what we do. I've done it as well until I had to question it, like, why do we do this? There's no point to it. So I said what I said, and I said it the way I said it.
Israel Adesanya. The New Zealand Breakers not only want to end the NBL regular season with a win, they need to. The Breakers play the Melbourne Phoenix in Christchurch tonight and must win and then wait to see if other results go their way to see if they can sneak into the top 4 playoffs. The motor racing veteran, 78-year-old Kenneth Smith, will line up on the grid for his 49th New Zealand Grand Prix at Manfield this weekend. Smith is a 3-time Grand Prix champion, winning his first title in 1976 and his last in 2004. And the football star Pelé has dismissed talk he is depressed and reclusive. He's assuring fans he's doing well and maintaining a busy schedule. Pelé's son told Brazilian media earlier in the week that the 3-time World Cup winner is depressed and reluctant to leave his house because of health problems. That's the news.
Coming up this evening, Country Life goes to the Little River Show. It's a big event on Banks Peninsula. The team also checks in on Waikato, where the dry weather is beginning to take its toll. The Chills are our Friday Night Live act. And because it's Valentine's Day, we've got a Sonic Tonic dedicated to the opposite of romantic love. Yes, Singles Night. Starts out in the news at 7 with me, Brian Crump. Only on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Gisborne to Wairarapa, becoming cloudy tonight. Patchy drizzle developing. Cloud and drizzle gradually clearing to fine weather tomorrow. For the remainder of the North Island, mainly fine with variable high cloud. Nelson, Buller and Westland mainly fine, becoming cloudy tomorrow. Fiordland, fine at first, becoming cloudy tonight and areas of drizzle developing, then turning to rain tomorrow evening. Marlborough, Canterbury, North Otago, Dunedin and Clutha, mostly cloudy with areas of drizzle. Drizzle and low cloud clearing tomorrow morning, but high cloud thickening up from tomorrow afternoon. For the remainder of Otago and Southland, fine or becoming fine tonight, cloud increasing tomorrow, scattered rain developing in the evening. Chatham Islands, cloudy today, becoming fine tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 6:07.
Thanks, Susanna, and thank you for joining us. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Calls tonight for the government to introduce a strict monitoring regime for all under 5-year-olds in New Zealand in the wake of a 4-year-old Flaxmere boy being brutally beaten 2 weeks ago. The recommendation was originally made by Coroner Wallace Bain following the brutal murder of Rotorua toddler Nia Glassy, who suffered appalling abuse, including being spun in a clothes dryer. Judge Bain repeated the recommendation for compulsory registration and monitoring of children up to the age of 5, including scheduled and unscheduled home visits. In his report into the death of Moko Rangi Te Herere, another toddler brutally abused and tortured, Scott Guthrie, who is the CEO of Transforming Justice, a foundation focused on rehabilitation and fairness for victims, is saying that the coroner's recommendations are gathering dust while successive governments have failed to act.
Dr. Wallace Bain did the coronial inquiry into Nia Glassie and Moko Rangatahirihiri and several other children, and not many of his recommendations have been implemented or even followed, and those recommendations would have saved a hell of a lot of children's lives.
Remind us what the key ones are in terms of monitoring children, the ones that haven't been implemented.
Okay, key one would have to be urgently assist in providing appropriate monitoring and oversight of young children within government agencies, and that is referring to the likes of Plunkett, entering homes, etc. That from birth, all children from birth be compulsory registered with government agencies, because we do have children out there that aren't registered, so that we're seeing these children on a 2 to 3 monthly basis at a doctor's premises or even in their private homes. Wallace Bain referred to entering a private house more specifically, because then we could see the environment that these children are living in and knowing that they're living in a safe and healthy environment.
Sorry, and to what age did he want that recommendation implemented?
Up to the age of 5, because then we could see children at school on a daily basis, and alarm bells would start ringing if they weren't attending school on a regular basis, etc. But he wanted it implemented up to the age of 5.
Were there recommendations in relation to sole parent households as well?
Absolutely. That there was compulsory state intervention and monitoring oversight of the care of children in all following circumstances: a single parent family who had previously come to the attention of SIFs, a single parent who was working full-time and placed their child in the care of others, a single parent on the DPB, and wherever there had been domestic or child violence arising in that household.
Okay, well, this raises some really serious questions about where the line is with state intervention and monitoring, because why should the focus just be on sole parent households, for example, that have been singled out there in those recommendations?
If we have a look at the history of Moko, came from a sole parent family, although it wasn't sole parent that was caring for him at the time. Nia Glassie, same sort of situation. A lot of these children are in a sole parent or a de facto relationship situation. That's where the problem lies. So that's why he's focusing on that specific. Let's have a look at the history, Lisa, because the history is very clear of what sort of family situations commonly these children are dying in.
Not all children, though, who are abused come from sole parent families, and a lot of people will look at these recommendations and say perhaps they haven't been introduced because they are draconian. What would you say to that?
No, I don't agree that they're draconian. What we've got to focus on is the families and the lifestyle that is coming to our attention at the moment. We can't single out single-parent families and say they're bad, because that's not what we're trying to do. But if we look at the history, the very clear history of child abuse in this country, there is a consistent, solid line of Moko, Nia Glassie, Lily Bing, James Whakaruru, and they all come from, I would even go as far as say, dysfunctional families, single-parent families. I'm not saying single parents kill their children, but history tells us single parent, high stress levels, high pressure. There is the consistency there, Lisa.
So are you suggesting we, in essence, profile families and watch those families until their children are 5 years old?
No, absolutely not. What I'm saying is I don't want to profile families. I'm saying mainstream. And Wallace Bain said exactly that. If we had Plunkett going into houses from birth right up to the age of 5 and assessing seeing the kiddies at home, having a cup of tea with mum and a chat, what's the stress level in the home? Is everything all good in the home? We would see a lot less harm in our community to children. And I'm talking about two-parent families. I'm talking about every child that's born in this country. Why can't we have a system where qualified people go and have a cup of tea, talk to the kids, what's going on here, everything's all good, and out the door we go.
So,
pretty common sense.
Why do you think this level of abuse keeps happening in our country?
Well, I don't know. The themes are very common. As Dr. Russell Wills, the ex-Children's Commissioner, said, the themes are very common for child abuse. The victims tend to be very young. They tend to be in families with abject poverty and drug and alcohol abuse. Drug and alcohol abuse is rife in New Zealand, but there is no simple answer. Men are regularly violent to their female partners and their children. We've got to stop that. Often there is alcohol at the bottom of child abuse, and alcohol is absurdly cheap in New Zealand. There hasn't been a fall in deaths of children, so clearly the government strategies for alcohol and drug abuse and monitoring children are not working. Start listening to the professionals and their suggestions that they want to put forward.
So do you think the government should adopt these outstanding recommendations made by the coroner, Wallace Bain?
Absolutely, 100% in support of that.
Have you spoken to any minister or government official about this?
Yes, I have.
Who, and what's been the response?
I don't want to say who yet, but high-ranking official, and the response has been very positive. But as you know, Lisa, the message that I get is that the wheels of government turn slowly. So my response to the government officials that I spoke to was simply the wheels turned very quickly when the Christchurch massacre happened. We are losing children in this country to murder every 5 weeks. We need to turn the wheels more quickly in relation to child abuse. We need to start waking up and protecting our little babies. We need to step up in this country because we're the third highest offending country in the OECD for child abuse. And as I've said to you before, Lisa, every 5 weeks we kill a child in this country. It's horrific. And we can't stay silent. Someone has to be held accountable, but we've got to change things.
And that is Scott Guthrie, who is from the Transforming Justice Foundation. The son of a man killed at the AFCO meat plant in Wairoa last week, and the district mayor are calling on the company to be upfront with workers about when the plant will fully reopen and whether it's safe. 61-year-old Alfred Edwards, known as Baldy, died sometime last Wednesday, but his body lay undiscovered for at least 5 hours until 5:30 that evening. Ruth Hill reports.
Moana Edwards says his father was apparently killed after pellets fell on him. His father's workmates have told him they were already worried about conditions at the plant, which was dangerously overstocked due to exports from China being put on hold because of the coronavirus outbreak there.
That's what other of the workers have told me, why there was so much stock in there, and that the pallets are on leaning and they were stacking in aisles, boxes of meat. They had told me that the place was too full for them to carry on production.
Mr. Edwards says on top of the tragedy of losing a workmate, many people have suddenly lost their income with operations at the plant suspended.
They're not paying them because my brother's wife, she works there. I asked her, are they giving you annual compensation payment? She said no. They haven't worked since 5:30 Wednesday.
In an email to RNZ, AFCO's General Manager Nigel Stevens says the incident is under investigation by both the company and WorkSafe, and it would be inappropriate to comment. He says any limitations as to site access have been imposed by WorkSafe as a standard part of their investigation process.
As previously outlined, our full focus is on supporting the family and our employees the best we can, and to that end we have been in close and ongoing contact with family members, supporting and assisting them in any way that we can. The same support applies to all employees impacted by the incident.
WorkSafe says it has not shut down the plant. A spokesperson has told RNZ a non-disturbance notice was issued, but this only prevents access to the area where the incident occurred. Wairoa District Mayor Craig Little, a former AFCO worker himself, knew Baldy Edwards personally and says the whole community is devastated by his death. He says the uncertainty is tough on workers.
They work hard in there and they don't need to lose a colleague, and also now they're doing a hardship been off work as well. Whatever the reason they closed, or they need to let the workers know, what does the future hold for them in the next few days.
The AFCO Works, which employs about 550 people at the height of the season, is one of the region's biggest employers. A blessing ceremony was held at the plant at 10 o'clock this morning, but it's not clear when or if everyone will be able to go back to work. RNZ understands some workers are reluctant to return until they have assurances that it's safe. Moana Edwards says some are being forced to rely on food banks and whānau to feed their families.
I want them to hurry up and reopen their plant, so long as it's safe, because all the people in my day wouldn't want to see the reason why they're all out of work.
RNZ understands under AFCO's collective agreement, workers must be paid for a minimum of 2 days a week during the season, and at least some workers were paid for one extra shift last week. Moana Edwards says he and his mother want answers from the company that employed his father on and off for 40 years.
Why did it happen? Was it unsafe? Why were they working in unsafe conditions? Why did it take so long for him to be found? Why was he working alone in the freezer? Those questions I want to know. When he went and had the autopsy, she wants to know when he died. Did he die from the impact, or did he freeze to death?
AFCO and Nigel Stevens have yet to respond to RNZ's questions about when the plant will reopen and whether the workers will be paid for the days they have been unable to work. For Checkpoint, Ruth Hill.
The Abortion Legislation Committee has delivered its much-anticipated report on the abortion legislation bill. Among the recommendations, the committee wants safeguards to address sex selection, late-term abortions and removing some of the barriers for women who require the procedure. Here's our political reporter, Charlie Drever.
The Select Committee received more than 25,000 submissions on the often divisive bill, which will remove the medical procedure from the Crimes Act. In the report, the committee explicitly wanted to note that the bill in no way condones abortion being used for sex selection, a problem highlighted in the submission stage. Committee Chair Ruth Dyson says the practice is not thought to be happening in New Zealand, but the committee is mindful that it could.
We have put in the legislation a requirement that the Director-General monitor births to determine if there's any indication of abortion being used for sex selection. It would be obvious from changes in sex at birth statistics, and then required the Director-General to make recommendations about action on that.
On available services, Ruth Dyson says the committee was very disturbed to hear the considerable delays women were faced with.
We heard examples of people having to travel considerable distances, and one example from a submitter from Queenstown to Invercargill just to receive a pill, basically, and then to have to stay till the next day. That's a huge amount of travel costs, time off work, accommodation. It's really not appropriate, so we've put pretty strong wording that asks for both timely access and also equity of access throughout the country.
Abortion Rights Aotearoa welcomes the report's findings on equity issues around accessing health services. However, they did not agree with some of the provisions in the bill on conscientious objection. Under the bill, medical practitioners can exercise conscientious objection unless there is a medical emergency. Our RAND's national president, Terry Bellamark, says sexual violation has not been classed in the bill as a medical emergency.
I think sexual violation complainants should not be lumped in with everybody else. And I think it's just callous to treat people in that situation as though the provider's psychological comfort is more important than their health and well-being.
The bill will go under conscience vote, meaning individual MPs will vote with their conscience and not along party lines. National MP Agnes Loheni was on the Select Committee, and in her minority report, she laid out why she does not think the bill should progress, removing abortion from the Crimes Act. She was most concerned about late-term abortions of more than 20 weeks.
The bar should be still higher in that post-20-week period. And post-20 week is, 20 weeks up till the moment before birth. And I know people get very uncomfortable with that, but at the end of the day, it is what the law will allow. There is no upper limit on that test.
Agnes Loheni also thought the committee adding the need to consult with another clinician before approving the procedure didn't go far enough.
There's actually no definition around to consult with another practitioner. I mean, that could be, what is it, a phone call? You just went down the hallway. There's nothing to hold that second practitioner actually had a look at the record, but there's no accountability there.
However, Ruth Dyson wanted to note of the very few patients who have late-term terminations, they are wanted pregnancies. The report will now go to the Minister Andrew Little and Cabinet for consideration. For Parliament, for Checkpoint, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
It's 6:23 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. It started with just one infected person, but now the Diamond Princess cruise liner is the second largest outbreak outside China, with at least 219 passengers testing positive for coronavirus. With less than a week to go until the official end of their 14-day quarantine, some passengers are yet to even be tested, and questions are now being raised about whether they were infected before the confinement period began, and why the Japanese government can only test 300 samples a day. Here's CNN's Will Ripley with life on board the Diamond Princess with children.
This is what a cruise is supposed to be like. For parents with young children on the Diamond Princess, this only happens for about an hour every few days.
Oink, oink.
All those other hours are spent like this, waiting for the daily delivery of fresh toys, coloring books, crayons, colorful beads.
I have this bracelet and also this one.
Arts and crafts can keep the kids busy for hours. Every morning, local jet skiers try to boost morale.
No!
Every evening, bunk beds become trampolines.
Being trapped in this cabin, it makes you think and realize we should appreciate the little moments, the little details of life.
Harvey is a young dad who asked us not to use his last name. He's on the quarantine cruise ship with his entire family.
There's 11 of us, and then there's 5 kids.
The youngest, 3. The oldest, 8.
What do you tell your children about why you guys are sitting there for this long?
We say there's this invisible monster called the coronavirus, and we can't go outside.
That invisible monster may have the parents more spooked than their kids. Nobody in Harvey's family is showing any symptoms of novel coronavirus. He thinks they should all be tested anyway.
The numbers are kind of strange to me. I'm also worried because even though I trust my own health, I don't want to be an invisible carrier.
The Japanese government has only tested a few hundred people out of more than 3,000 on the Diamond Princess. Many are asking, why not test everyone at once? Japan can only process around 300 test kits per day. The nation expects to more than triple its capacity by early next week, one day before the end of the quarantine. The question many are asking, is it too little, too late?
If we are worried that we might be carrying, then it will affect our daily life when we go back. That's one of the major concerns, that we don't want to be carrying it, and then we don't want to spread it to communities.
Harvey worries what could happen when they go back home to Hong Kong. Could he and his children be stigmatized? Could they pass the virus to their neighbors, family, and friends? Peace of mind, he says, can only come if everyone on board is tested, and if those tests come back negative.
And a 104-year-old US Marine veteran is celebrating Valentine's Day this year like never before. Bill White, who served in World War II, has received a mountain of 70,000 love letters and well wishes sent from all over the world. Yahaira Yaquez reports.
Boxes on boxes full of Valentine's Day cards, all addressed to Major Bill White, a 104-year-old Marine Corps veteran who served in World War II. The cards and notes are part of Operation Valentine, a project meant to honor the Purple Heart veteran who now lives in an assisted living facility in Stockton, California. The letters started pouring in after a fellow resident in a social media post called on people to send cards to White as a way to honor him. 100 cards was the goal, but so far ahead of Valentine's Day on Friday, at least 70,000 have come in.
It leaves me sort of speechless in a way. When I think of what has been done here, it's something that I've never heard of or seen, had done to me before, and all of a sudden here like a ton of bricks. It's
Many writers expressed their appreciation for White, who served for 35 years and was wounded at Iwo Jima.
They go on and on and on.
But according to White's daughter, they also expressed gratitude toward the veterans who died too soon.
And we did get one card that I think sums up what a lot of people are feeling, and it's written by Jane, and she says that her grandfather was an Army paratrooper in World War II, and he would have turned 100 years old this year. And she says, I miss him so much. Sorry. By sending you this card, I feel as though I am sending my grandfather a card.
With so many unopened envelopes and more rolling in, White's family has enlisted volunteers to help open and read to him what's inside. Though it's all new to him. White says he actually never really celebrated Valentine's Day, even when his wife of 42 years was alive.
Remarkable story. 70,000 cards. That is a lot of reading. Time for a quick bit of feedback before we have to go. A lot of you getting in touch about water shortages. This person says have a bucket in the shower to catch the water that runs away while you're waiting for the warm water to come through. Excellent idea. Someone else says that they're on rainwater in Glenbrook and ran out completely the weekend before last, and they had to wait a week before the water tanker arrived. So they drained the hot tub into the water tank to use it to flush the toilets and provide showers for the family of 5, including 2 teenagers. They were soaping up, they say, and then turning on the shower to save water. Also taking laundry to the laundromat in Pukekohe, and it certainly makes the children aware of conservation and the effects of climate change, says Jill. Others say save the grey water in the toilet from the shower and wash basin, and use the last wash rinse from the washing machine in your garden. Thanks for all your tips. Just remember you can catch up on all our stories online, and have a wonderful weekend. Thanks for being with us today.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Primary Teachers Union is worried by a continuing fall in regular school attendance and says schools and communities need to strengthen their ties. AFCO Meat Company is being urged to tell the Wairoa community when it plans to fully reopen following a worker's death at the works last week. A parliamentary select committee has delivered its findings on the abortion legislation bill, but not every member wants the bill to proceed. And filmmaker Renai Mahi says Sir Robert Jones's decision to drop his defamation case against her has ended a stressful period of her life. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7, then it's Nights with Brian Crump.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
I came in as Minister of Broadcasting, and the only public broadcaster I had was Radio New Zealand. I would love TVNZ to have been a public broadcaster.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
He's quite passionate about